Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the Eternal Deck History series. In this series I talk about the history of a specific archetype in detail, in this case about Feln Reanimator. The main basis for that will be my archive of Throne tournament deck lists, and I will try to fill in the gaps with what I can find on YouTube, Discord, Eternal Warcry and Reddit, but you have to keep in mind that I wasn't around for all of Eternal's history, and that it can be tough to find detailed information on how a deck developed between tournaments. All deck history videos will follow the same general structure, which you can see on screen now. Firstly, I will shortly talk about the defining features of the deck, the parts that stayed constant throughout all of the deck's history. After that, I will go through the history of the deck in chronological order, divided into core phases, 4 in the case of Feln Reanimator. I will show example deck lists from those phases and talk about card choices and general developments and the reasons behind them. At the end, I include a modern version of the archetype, either from someone else or made by myself, and shortly talk about it. You can find all the deck lists including that modern version and all other important sources I used for each video, including a thanks to everyone who helped me with questions, or the modern deck lists in the description below. With that said, let's dive into today's archetype, Feln Reanimator. Feln Reanimator was a very successful Throne combo deck between early 2019 and early 2020. In that period it reached 32 tops at Direwolf events, including an ICQ win in early 2020 and multiple top 8s at different events. The idea behind it was to use cheap, discard and self-mill cards like Sporefolk to fill your void with big units that you could then revive with Grasping for Shadows. With the right setup you would basically win on the spot if not for a board wipe in the opponent's hand, and you even had ways to play around that and or you accrued enough advantage out of your grasping play to still win after getting wiped. Compared to most other highly played competitive decks in Eternal's history, Feln Reanimator was highly standardized with a big core of about 30 to 35 main deck non-power cards that almost all 32 lists between early 2019 and early 2020 shared. That core included playsets of the 4 best cheap discard effects available to Feln at the time: Sporefolk, Master Cartographer, Herald Song and Back Alley Delinquent. The first was less targeted, but with the high number of good mill hits, most decks played between 16 and 18, you still had about a 70 to 75% chance to mill at least one card you really wanted to mill. Kato and Herald Song could discard the expensive reanimation target from your hand instead and dig closer towards grasping. And Delinquent also could do the first thing, but instead of drawing a card he always gave you a sabotage instead, which could be used to discard board wipes, spell negates, void hate or just strong proactive cards from the opponent's hand. The other half of the core included 7 copies of Grasping, 3 in the main deck and 1 in the market, that you could grab with one of the 4 copies of Carrington Merchant, because until March 2020 you were allowed to play copies of the same card in the main deck and in the market as long as you only used single faction merchants. And that core included the stable reanimation targets, 4 copies of Vara, Sindel and Black Sky Harbinger each. Back then you could use them to create a reanimation chain. Grasping would revive Vara, who would then revive a Sindel. Today the combo would have to stop here thanks to a nerf to Vara in August 2022, but back then she triggered on every shadow unit summon, not just the first each turn, and the Healy key from a Sindel were shadow, so she would summon another unit for each of them. In the best case, one of those units you would summon in addition to a Sindel was Black Sky Harbinger, because its effect would trigger a Sindel to draw your card from the opponent's deck. But if you revived a Sporefolk to set up the void for a second Grasping, a Merchant to draw the Grasping from your market if you haven't used it already, or a Delinquent to discard a board wipe with Sabotage if you had 1 power left, you were also more than fine. And keep in mind you could revive 2 things, so you could revive something like Black Sky Harbinger plus one of those 3, or you could even revive another Vara or another Sindel if you had more of those. The 16 to 20 other main deck non-power slots were a bit more open, same for the market cards and the power base outside of the staple 4. Feln Banner, Seed of Cunning, Crest of Cunning and Shaman's Contract. You would play 4 copies of each of those in every list, and with Feln Banner you did the same as with Grasping, you played 3 in the main deck, 1 in the market. But before those flex spots outside of the big core will be what I mostly talk about now when I go through the different historic iterations of the deck. But before we get to that solidified list, we have to talk about the long and tough road up until that point. Many of the deck's core cards were around since set 1, the Empty Throne, including Vara, Grasping, Sporefolk and Herald Song, but without another Ascendal level Reanimator target, and without consistent access to Grasping thanks to Carandon Merchant, the deck never had success in the ETS seasons of 2017 and 18. But it doesn't mean that people didn't experiment with the deck. At first, people just added Grasping and a few discard effects like Herald Song to standard Feln control lists to make them more explosive at a cost of consistency, like in this list posted by Skiat on Eternal Warcry in January 2017. But soon after, we can find the first real Reanimator versions, like this one posted by Isomorphic in May 2017. It includes the 2 later staple discard effects, Sporefolk and Herald Song, and Blind Storyteller, so 12 discard effects already, plus 18 cards that you want to discard, 14 which are 14 expensive units, and 4 copies of Privilege of Rank, a card that I will talk about more later. In the set releases of the months after that, the deck got more discard effects, reanimation targets, and in June 2018 even the long-awaited consistency boost for Grasping with the release of Carandon Merchant. But outside of a single ETS weekly top 4 in a Hunting Scream variant played by Missing Toes, it remained a casual ladder deck without any real tournament success. The biggest reason for that was a nerf to Vara in February 2018. After the nerf, Vara would not trigger on her own summon, so you always had to play another shadow unit in addition to her, which made it too clunky for competitive play. But after Vara was buffed to trigger from her own summon again on January 17th, 2019, just with the comparatively minor new downside that each unit summoned with her effect would gain Voidbound, the deck quickly came together. In the ICQ, the Price of Freedom, which was held just a month after that buff, Feln, or more precisely JPS Reanimator, managed to claim 5 out of the top 64 spots, including 1 top 8 in the hands of Isomorphic, whose list you can see on screen now. It has the big 35 card core that I talked about at the beginning. The remaining main deck slots are filled with Strategize, which helps with finding Grasping, and which could return Justice Sigils back into the deck for Privilege, 2 copies of Nocturnal Observer as additional discard effect, Suffocate to have some interaction against aggro that was cheap enough to easily weave it into your proactive plays, and lastly Privilege of Rank, at this point still a free power spell that drew 2 instead of just 1 Justice Sigil when played, and like today it was automatically played when you discarded it, so it was clearly a staple in Feln Reanimator. Even Foremost list didn't play any other Justice cards because it helped the deck curve out consistently, which is important for any deck, but especially for one that basically wins because it can do something very strong earlier than other decks. Being forced to play 5 Justice Sigils was definitely not great, but it was absolutely worth the upside of a free draw 2 effect anytime you discarded a Privilege, especially because the influence cost of the deck were quite low. You only needed 2 Shadow Influence for Grasping, which was rarely a problem on turn 5 with 17 Shadow Sources, plus 1 Feln Banana Market. Same for the 3rd Shadow Influence in the games where you had to hardcast Vara on turn 8, which was not too uncommon, especially against decks with negates like FTP Midrange or later on Horror Renown and Horror Control, because in those matchups your Grasping could be negated and then you might be forced to hardcast Vara on turn 8 for a reanimation chain. The market had an additional copy of Grasping and one of Feln Banner, as I said before. The other 3 slots were usually reserved for reactive cards. Annihilate and Drindra's Choice together meant that you could kill any unit, which was important to answer one big problem card, Vanquisher's Blade, which already saw a decent amount of play before February 2019, and which only became more prevalent afterwards, thanks to Feln Reanimator becoming more prevalent. And the last spot was pretty much always reserved for Burglarize, which was the best possible answer against the market copy of Gavel, which you otherwise just couldn't really beat most of the time. But it could also answer other problematic relics like Marty's Chains or later on Svetja's Sanctum. The deck remained somewhat successful for the rest of the 2019 season, reaching a few tops at almost every major tournament, although never more than 5. In that time, the list barely changed, only picking up Honor of Claws from the Homecoming campaign in March as a new staple, usually played instead of Strategize. The new set released in May 2019, Dark Frontier, didn't include a single new staple for the deck, but some players included a few copies of Lightning Sprite or Gust Rider instead of Nocturnal Observer, Ice Bolt as additional removal, or Royal Decree to permanently remove problematic cards. The best indicator for the stale character of Feln Reanimator was the fact that Relvin played Isomorphic's list card for card to a second place finish more than 3 months later at the Ranked Masters Challenge, which qualified them for the World Championship Finals 2019, where they played the same deck with only some slight changes, although this time less successful. They finished top 16. But right after that World Championship in July 2019, in between the 2019 and 2020 season, 2 things forced the deck to change. The first was a nerf to Privilege of Rank in July 2019. Instead of drawing 2 Justice Sigils, it now only drew 1, which made it a lot worse at helping you reach 5 or 6 power consistently, up to the point of not being worth including anymore, because you still had to basically pay the cost of including several Justice Sigils in your deck. That cost then became even harsher with the release of Set 7, The Flame of Xulta, in October of 2019, because that set included a new big payoff for self-discard effects, Felrog the Outcast. On release, up until a nerf in June 2021, Felrog's effect to summon himself after getting discarded didn't cost any power, so as long as you had the necessary influence, you could easily summon Felrog for free in Reanimator decks because you had so many ways to discard him. But that steep influence cost meant that you had to change the power base, as you can see in the list on screen, which Cola Coma played to a first place finish at the ICQ Promises by Firelight in December 2019. The Justice Sigils got replaced with more Shadow and Primal Sigils to keep seats undepleted, and with 2 or 4 copies of the newly released Feln Insignia. Because of the inclusion of a Sindel, which is not just a Feln card, Insignia was not undepleted in this deck, but the deck was desperate enough for fixing after the release of Felrog to still include it in the absence of any other dual power. We didn't have Feln Tomes, Paintings, or Marks at that point. With 13 to 15 duels in the main deck and a banner in the market, Felrog's triple Primal, triple Shadow influence requirement was live on turn 4 semi-consistently, which was perfect for Honor of Claws. You could play Honor of Claws on turn 4, which was a good play anyway to dig towards your Grasping and to set up your Void, and then you could discard Felrog for it, play him for free, discard a card from the opponent's hand. Additional changes include the re-inclusion of Strategize, because you needed more card draw to consistently hit 5 or 6 power, now that Privilege was gone, and most decks also added some additional reanimation options, either Akanta as single target removal or Animist as some kind of board wipe, to make the Grasping plays even more powerful. That meant something else had to go from the list, usually the main deck removal, which was definitely risky against Acro decks, but the insane tempo from 3 Felrogs was enough to kind of make up for it. Other than Felrog and Insignia, the deck didn't get a lot of new cards in Flame of Xulta and its respective campaign Promises by Firelight, but cards like Edict of Makar or Eremot's Designs replaced Annihilate or Rindra's Choice in the market sometimes. The new Felrog variant was very successful in early 2020. At the ICQ that Cola Cola won, 8 players topped with it, including the 2 finalists, Cola Coma and I'm So Bad. And at the next Throne ICQ, Echoes of Eternity, it still reached 6 tops, including 2 top 8s. But that all came to a screeching halt with a big rule change in early March 2020 that removed the option to play the same card in the main deck and market if your deck only included single faction merchants as market access. That was a harsh nerf for Feln Reanimator because it meant that you only had 4 copies of Grasping going forward, not 7. That drastic reduction of consistency was enough to turn it from a top tier contender to a rogue deck overnight, as shown by the fact that it only managed 2 more tops in the whole 2020 season, both in the hands of Cola Chroma again. You can see the second top of those on the screen now. The general idea of the deck was still the same, with 19 discards effects, Felrauch, 4 grasping and 12 reanimation targets. But now with Smuggler instead of Carrington Merchant, which allowed you to run a pseudo copy of grasping in the market, either with Linrei's Kist, like in this version, or with Reread, which Cola Chroma played in the previous topping list. But those extra steps slowed the deck down massively, and the release of Khadra First Seal in Set 9 Archendevs in June 2020 sealed the deal for Feln Reanimator, because it was not even the best Reanimator shell from that point onward anymore. It still had 2 short moments of playability later that I want to mention shortly. In late March 2021, right after the release of the Stormbreak campaign, Isomorphic managed to get the last ever top for Feln Reanimator thanks to 2 new cards. Grenahan, which used to discard the cards it didn't draw instead of putting them at the bottom of your deck, and Dark Purveyor. Grenahan was an insane consistency tool. It digged almost as deep as a Sporefolk, also discarded 2 cards, but contrary to Sporefolk, it also drew you a card. And Lifesteal meant that you could sacrifice it with another inclusion, Kilo, to summon a Merchant, which could then grab you important combo pieces like Grasping. You could play Grasping in the market instead of the main deck in this version, mostly because of Kilo, because she added a lot of consistency to your reanimation plan, either by acting as Grasping herself, if you sacrificed a Harbinger for her effect, because Harbinger had 2 battle skills, so you could summon a Vara with Harbinger, and then Vara could resummon a Sindel from the void, or just the Harbinger again. Or by getting you to Grasping by summoning a Merchant, like I said before, by sacrificing something like Grenahan for Kilo. And then she could even convert that Merchant into your new second win condition, Purveyor, which could buff an evasive unit like Gust Rider, or a Smuggler with Berserk for a huge damage push that you could repeat later by reviving the buffed unit with Scream or a Vara. But sadly, that version didn't get much time to shine because Reanimator got some nerfs right before the next Throne tournament, thanks to the release of Alive for Life and Elding, whose on-discard effect used to be free, in Set 11 Revelations. For the few days between the release of Set 11 in May 2021 and the first balance patch on June 2nd, 2021, Reanimator was basically the only thing worth playing in Throne, next to maybe Feln Dredge, with which it shared many core cards. But the quick nerfs to Asindel, whose Heliki were made factionless, so they wouldn't trigger Vara anymore, Grenahan, which now bottomed the cards it didn't draw, and Felrauch and Elding, which now both needed 2 power to activate their on-discard effects, the deck was basically killed in a competitive sense for the years to come. That would already be a bad enough spot to start with when trying to make a current version, but it got even worse thanks to the Vara nerf in 2022. Despite that loss of reanimation chains thanks to the nerf, I still decided to keep the old idea of reanimating Vara to then summon Asindel, as you can see in my list on screen, because Asindel alone loses to a single removal, while Vara at least forces them to have double removal or a board wipe, otherwise you threaten to revive something big with her again on the next turn. The deck also got some nice new cards to at least partially make up for all the past nerfs. Darkwater Vines, Fear and Injustice are all great ways to get a lot of cards into your void, and the later also helps you dig towards a reanimation spell. And Marauder and Collapse can discard reanimation targets or privilege from your hand to remove problematic units or curses, like Lawmage or Gavel. I decided to replace Harbinger with Animist, and in some ways also Fear. Fear is also a decent reanimation target, because the old chain of Vara into Asindel into Harbinger is not possible anymore, thanks to the Vara nerf, and because Animist seemed like the best additional reanimation target. Although if you want, you could also try something like Icaria, Akanta, or Sadistic Grimalkin instead. Because I wanted to play Alive for Life anyway, and because we don't have Felrauch anymore, it made sense to bring Privilege back. It's way weaker than it used to be, but free power from discard effects is still very nice. The Justice Sigils are also less problematic now, because the power base got smoother with all the dual influencer power cards released in the last few years, and like I said earlier, because we don't need a heavy influence cost for Felrog anymore. With all those new additions, I'd love to say that the deck is good again, but they are just not enough to outweigh all the nerfs and 4 years of slow but steady power creep. The deck is more consistent at setting up your Void and playing a reanimation spell on curve than it used to be, but thanks to the Vara nerf, resolving one of those spells is just not enough to win most games anymore. Because of that, I'd give the deck a 3 out of 10, which means it is still somewhat functional and can win you some games, but if you're looking for an efficient ladder grinder, you should definitely look somewhere else. This marks the end of the fourth episode of the Eternal Deck History series. You can find all the sources and deck lists in the video description, and if you haven't already, you can check out the other deck history videos and Eternal Top 10 episodes on my channel. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a nice weekend.